What's up guys, it's Brent Le Blanc, coming back with another look development guide. Today we're going to be texturing this theater chair in Substance Painter and using Maya to do some procedural technique with dust and color variation. Let's get started. I know it's been quite a while. You have to understand I have a full-time job and a family, and I've been also a little lazy on top of that. Alright. So let's take a look. So what I'm trying to do is I found this theater, this old theater in Tarrytown, New York. I thought was really interesting. It was a good case to try a lot of modular workflows and get some procedural stuff mixed in with hand painted. So the first thing I'm going to start is this chair. My approach was going to be, I'm just going to texture it, try to get as much variation as I can in Maya as far as like color variation and different procedural techniques to try to get it to look different. Let me pull up what it looks like in Maya. All right. If I go over to the diffuse albedo, you can see that each chair has a different variation of color and each wood has a different color as well. And it's a subtle thing. And even though I didn't change the texturing, so you can see there's some repeats here. So what I did when I was dressing it, I was careful to try to hide that so that I didn't have to paint multiple versions of wear. If you had more time or you really needed to for the shot, I would probably create maybe 3 different texture variations, not just changing color. What I also did was I added this procedural dust layer to everything. You can see here there's dust on the seat, and there's dust on the top of this and on top of the chairs and things like that. So let's get back to the chair, how I actually textured that. What I was thinking when I was doing this is like, first I'll lay out the thread pattern, and then I will have a stuffing version showing through in different wear patterns, and then where people would sit and stand and sit and stand, ward down the threading there and look at reference on like how that actually looks. And then for the wood, on these little armrests, they have these number plates on them, and then a simple metal, and then the wood backing on these. So I'll just hit Control, Alt, and right click, and that will focus the texture set. So I'm just going to hit Alt Q, and that will solo the visibility of that texture set. Let's turn off the copper. Start out with this base layer, and we'll just step through each one. Okay, so for this base wood, so we got this base color, which is pretty simple, and then a wood fibers, and I'm having it run long ways, and that is just laying out my UVs all in one direction so that they all run the same way. Then I have a wood fibers medium. This is just the library wood material that I was using there. So you can just go through and break that down, or you can create your own. I just didn't because speed. I mean, that's what these are for. Sometimes I will create stuff from scratch, but not always. Sometimes I just need something to start with and then, you know, start changing it. And then I added a edge darkening. So if you look at my mask, I just used I don't even know why this is filled in there. Honestly, it's not doing anything. And then I have this curvature, just calling out those edges. And then I painted in some areas to add some more. And then I wanted to do a lightening pass where people would be touching it, putting their hand here, and the oils in their hand, breaking it down. But the idea is that I wanted to lighten the wood in areas of contact and things like that. And then I wanted it to be lacquered over again. At some point, they did maintenance on these chairs. Then years went by again and did stuff on top of that. So, you know, just add like a little story to it, you know, make it up in your head, how this chair would have worn over time. I grabbed this wood chip hull Nordic material, which is just another wood material, and it doesn't even match the one below it, but it doesn't really matter. I'm just using it as areas where the lacquer was being completely broken down and the raw wood was showing through. So there's this shiny lacquer here, and then you can see this very rough, bare looking wood color that's coming through, and it just adds a lot of interest. These chairs have been through a lot of time, so You just add little things like that. And this layer is just kind of an overall dirt and grime layer. So there's that base wood color that you would get, then I added the other stuff, and then, just adding a story to it. And then this is like years of dirt and grime. So it really just breaks up the roughness of the wood and also makes it much darker. So it just looks like it's been through years and years. And those layers were the first one was just an overall darkening, which was just a layer with an HSL, setting that to pass through. And I just brought down the lightness and then brought up the saturation a little bit. And then this layer was just a grunge map, grunge wipe smudge heavy. Just messed with the balancing there. Did a little bit of the levels. Has the levels for base color. And then I also added an overall roughness value just to make it a bit rougher. Then I added this edges wear. This one's pretty subtle. So you can see I'm doing a little bit of height change and an HSV shift. So if I go to base color, you can see it's chipping at the edges. And I'm also taking the height. So I've got the HSL, then I added a fill, taking the height down a little bit, give those chips a little bit of depth. And then I pretty much had the base wood that I wanted, pretty beat up, worn, seen years of abuse in lots of movies. And then I added this copper plate, which I could have easily done this with a piece of geo, but I just did it in texture. And all that is just stamped a little plate, and then I just used the copper, this base color, this amount of height, roughness, metallic. Then I added in a little bit of color change, roughness change, and then I added in a dirt layer. And then this one was just adding in a little bit of height difference. So I just had this grunge leaks, and then I blurred it. And then I added those little bolts, which was just 2 dots. And then I added a fill, changed the roughness a little bit, turned down the metallic, and then I did an overall roughness adjustment to the whole thing. And that was it for that part. So I pretty much just copied wood material that I did here. I might have done it a little bit different, same idea. And then it was just a really simple metal for this rod, because you don't even see this thing. And I only did 1 arm rest because I'm just going to duplicate this thing over. If I saw too much repetition, I would probably go in and texture a couple of versions, but it was not necessary. Okay, so I'm gonna go to this seat and break down how that was made. Just gonna hit Alt Q. So I've got this worn layer, turn that off. Just start turning off each layer and work my way up. All right, so for the bottom layer, I did the seat stuffing, and it's just a really simple material. So I just got this yellow base color, and then I took the roughness up pretty high. Then I added in an HSL and then just darkened and saturated it. Then I just added this random cells, roughness and height, and then I just inflated it a little bit, or later whenever I started pushing out areas. But anyway, this layer here was me just adding in darkening, adding in this little lip here where the seam where this stuff is sewn together. I darkened it with this little line here. And then I added another layer of wear. So I just painted in this area. So what I actually did was I painted this little mask here for people's butt and legs. And then I took the fabric anchor and I subtracted it from it. It's kind of only wearing the top part of that fabric, because the inside of that is, it's kind of raised, or it's lower than that other area. So that would be changed differently. So let me go back down to that stack and show you. So I've got this pattern cutter here. Let's actually go down to that cutter. Find out where that is. Okay, here. So this is actually where I made the anchoring system in the mask that I used for the threading of this seat cushion. So what I did was I just added this fabric cross curved, and it's just a pattern that's in here. I think it's this one, or just one of these, one of these random procedural patterns. You could make your own, or you could use the ones that are in here. I tend to just use the ones that are in here, unless there's a really specific case, and I may go and create it in Designer. But for this, super simple. So what I needed to do is, this doesn't really work on its own. So I put a warp in there, just raise the intensity a little bit. This is just so it's not so repetitive. Because if you look like that, it looks way too CG and machined. So I just warped it so it kind of looks like, you know, how thread is. It kind of warps and moves. Then I blurred that, and then I retightened it. And then I made it pretty tight. That way it kind of pulls in. And, you know, and I was going back and forth looking at this in this view to see what it was doing. So it started out like that. Then I added that warp. Then I blurred it. Then I added its levels and started just pulling it in like it was woven. Then I added an anchor because I wanted to use the same mask higher in the stack to do different operations. Didn't end up using it as much as I thought I was going to, but yeah, the anchoring system is really nice. You should get used to using that. Okay, then I got the surface details. Now that's annoying. I just had a crash. This just has a gray in it, and I was just multiplying it. Looks like I was just kind of changing the color. I could have done that within the HSL. Doesn't matter. Then I added a surface details, which is just a Gaussian spots, and it looks like I was just multiplying the height. Yeah, it looks like just breaking up to imply that woven thatching. Because, you know, this is not seen very close up, so just keep that in mind. You just want it to react to the light. See, without that on there, it kind of looks a little too smooth, so that when the light rakes across it, it looks a little more interesting and woven. Then for this one, yeah, it's just darkening the edges because, you know, dirt and grime would get in the creases of the chair and those types of areas where there's like lower contact, and it would just be cleaned less often. That just tends to happen in where there's a lot of objects that can occlude it. That would, and it would be kind of, it's more saturated and stuff like that because it would have less contact too. So it would be like grime would get in there, and it would be, people would be sitting on this part the least. And it looks like I have a little mistake here on the top part of the chair from when I copied it over. So this one was me lightening those areas with this HSL. So I turned up the saturation and the brightness a little bit, changed the hue, and I started just painting in that wear pattern. And it was a little intense, so I subtracted out the areas under it, like I'd said earlier. And the way that I did that was just pulling that pattern anchor, added a fill, added the pattern cutter anchor in there, and then subtracted it. So it just cut that signal. And that's a way that you can just add a little level of complexity. And this, I think, was to add overall wrinkling to the whole chair. It would be a little bit wavy from like age and people sitting on it and things like that. And how I did that is I just used this crystals mask. Let me turn off the blur. And it just looks like that. And then I just did something like this. You can see it's a little too sharp. So I added a blur just to smooth it out a little bit. All right. And then for this one, then I just pulled that, made a fill, put that pattern cutter inside to the anchor, then added a blur, re-leveled it, and then added a HSL. And I actually nested that inside of, as you can see, let me turn this off. It's an overall on this one. And I didn't necessarily want it to do it on the whole thing. So one way that you can mask a mask is to put this layer inside of a folder and then mask the folder. So you can see I'm painting it with like this, this leaks or this directional noise. So this pattern is being masked by this one. So I painted that, added this leaks. When I turn that back on, you can see now it's kind of only showing this pattern in just that small area that I chose. And that's kind of a way that you can stack masking. All right, and that's it for this one, guys. So in the next tutorial, I'm going to go over how I compile all this in Maya and add all the variation in the shaders. Also, if you'd like, you can go onto my Gumroad and you can pick up the smart materials that I've been making for these theater chairs, and you can use them for whatever project you'd like. Alright, thanks so much for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.